Me shivering in my own shower with a water
yeah,
bottle.
Yeah, in a wipey. That whole visual is just sorry, but yeah, I'm gonna have to figure out how to remove that from my brain cells.
That's what happens when all your pipes are frozen, man.
But I gotta tell you, your hair came out really good.
You like it? Yeah, it was stylish, I think.
Can you imagine?
It's probably because it hasn't been washed in a week.
If we were back in Australia with the long ponytail days with Ragman and the other guys.
Oh my God.
That would be, you know.
That seems, it's weird. It's in some ways it seems like it was yesterday, but in other ways it seems like it was a lifetime ago. Yeah.
It was a lifetime ago, right? Frankly.
Well, it was, I know, but in some ways it feels like it was just yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm still I'm still 12 on the inside, Rabold.
I hear you.
Well, you know, I think that it was great. There was the first, believe it or not, the first heavy metal tour on Vertec worldwide.
Was it?
Yeah. Ted Levy introduced us at the Wilton Theater.
Yeah.
And you put that PA through its paces that day, and then we went off to Australia. And
why did I agree to do that?
You know,
what was I thinking?
Right?
No, I knew that. You know, that whole tour I was mixing on Prism, and then the partnership with Jans, I think it just happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was either going to be that or S4s, and I think that the S4 numbers would have required either one or two more semis. That was
the issue. It was like me talking with Patrick, the production manager, and just being like, "Yeah." I mean, there's nothing wrong with 90 S4s. You know what I mean?
No, not at all. It's just that if you're driving from Melbourne all the way to Perth, it's a long way.
Yeah.
Those trucks looked like went through hell.
It was a lot of shit, but
man, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it was a great tour.
Times. That I would say that one of the highlights of my career was that Kiss Symphony thing.
Yeah, that was insane. That was total insanity. But so. The good old days. Five of us jump into a minivan and go to an Adelaide winery, and everybody at the winery looks at us like going, "Are we getting robbed? Who are all these people with tattoos and dressed in black?"
It was fun. It was good times.
Oh man!
I don't want to interrupt memory lane there. It sounds like some awesome times. We're gonna get started here in just a little bit. It's pretty cool. We're seeing people from all over the world, from Newcastle, from Germany, from Nashville, from South Africa, Winnipeg, Toronto, Dublin, Slovenia, Oklahoma, Netherlands. So we've got people tuning in from all over the world right now.
Fantabulous.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Oklahoma? That's far.
The country of Oklahoma.
Right.
Yeah, stay off 35. I think it's a little frozen.
Yeah, let me tell you, they're probably having the same issues we are here, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Here in Dallas.
So at the top of the hour, guys, you guys ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll hit the record button and we'll get going. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this webinar, Advanced Audio Mixing Techniques with Ken Pooch Van Druten and Chris Rabold. My name is Michael Grandinetti, and I'm a content marketing coordinator here at Harman. A few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenters, and they will try to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded, and the link will be made available a few days after the presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we encourage you to take a look at those webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as by visiting Harman Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'm going to pass it to Harman's very own Raul Gonzalez to introduce the presenters and get things started. Take it away, Raul.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our guests from all over the world. Today, we have a super special Harman session for you with two of the most iconic front of house engineers in the business today. I'd like to first introduce a guy that requires no introduction. He's been with us before, an experienced producer, graduate of the Berklee College of Music, more Pernelli and Turling top awards than anybody should ever win. Grammy nominated. He's worked with bands like Linkin Park, Kiss, Jay-Z, Travis Scott, Guns N' Roses. Please welcome Iron Maiden's front of house engineer, your friend and my friend, Kenneth Pooch van Druten. Say hello, Pooch.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. Appreciate you. Appreciate you joining us. It's going to be a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. A lot of fun with this second guest. I've been chasing these young men for a long time. He is a fan of timbales and congas on Widespread Panic, a graduate of Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro. He has been mixing all the bands that win all the Grammys. Kenny Chesney, Alicia Keys, Florence and the Machine, Bruno Mars, Lady Gaga. That's why that Lady Gaga national anthem sounded so good. Please welcome for the first time to our Harman session, the one and only Chris Rabold. Say hello, Chris.
What is going on, everybody?
I hope you are both doing well. For those of you joining us from other warm countries, please be aware that we are going through some apocalyptic cold weather in the Midwest. So we're very happy to be able to have Pooch here today, frozen Texas. So
we got the squirrels on the generator back here generating some AC so that I can be
right. There you go.
Yeah.
For those of you, I'm sure that everybody here knows, but I have to start by saying this. First of all, the title of the session, Advanced Audio Mixing Techniques. So there are some things that will be advanced, like the title says. Number two, all of the topics we're going to cover today can be analyzed in depth on Pooch and Rabold's podcast or Pooch and Rabold's YouTube channel. If you haven't been following this, you need to start tonight. You got 43 hours to go listen starting tonight. Put it on your calendar. And same thing with the podcast. Those can be found on your favorite podcast platform. And so that is that for announcements. I want to figure out how to stop sharing. This will be a conversatorium. We're going to converse, no PowerPoint. And so I encourage you to set up your computer on gallery view, and if you prefer, so you can see all three of us. So thank you guys for coming. I hope you're both doing well and staying healthy. And let's just jump into it. Today's session is going to be longer than our typical 1 hour session because it is just impossible to talk to these two guys for just 1 hour.
We talk a lot.
We love to chat. I'm a huge fan of education. This Harman series emphasizes continuing education. So I love to hear your take. You Pooch, you went to Berkeley. Rabold, you went to MTSU. I'd love to tell me a little bit of that time and how that impacted or helped kind of shape the career that you have had over the last 25 years.
Chris, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think for me, I know for me, the big thing about, where I went to school at MTSU, they have the oldest 4-year program in the nation. It's an actual degree. It's not a certificate, and the certificate programs are great, but that meant something to me and it meant something to my folks. That it was an actual college degree, but it was 100% studio focused. I think at the time now they have some more sound reinforcement. Maybe there's a whole thing now. I'm not even sure. But for me, it was getting the theory so that when I went, as I was learning, and gigging and working in clubs and bars and frats and all these other places that you start out, when I went to go do something, I at least kind of sort of knew the why of why it was happening. Yeah. You know what I mean? And just the other day, I had a 7-year-old. Someone has a 7-year-old that has decided he wants to be a sound engineer.
Awesome.
How cool is that?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and he just came up with it on his own. So we had, and he asked if I went to school, and I told him yes, and I didn't do it just because I think his parents probably wanted that answer,
right?
But because I really did find it invaluable to me to get the theory. Of course, there's plenty of hands-on in school as well,
right?
But the theory is really what stuck with me, and is what I took from that experience the most.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, I agree. If anybody ever asks me, should I go to an audio school, the answer is always yes. And here's why. It's a place to fail. It's a place to go and be like, oh, I'm going to put, whatever microphone in front of this guitar amp and see what it does. when you do that in the real world, there's clients and there's money involved and there's, all these kind of things. So I had 4 years at Berkeley to beg, borrow, and steal studio time, and at 3 a.m, put whatever in front of a guitar amp and be like, oh, okay, I like that, but let's move it over here. And I spent hours doing that. So it's experimentation, and it's the theory that Rabold was talking about that I think you can't get just anywhere else. So if you have that opportunity, I highly recommend you go to school.
Yeah, absolutely. The opportunity to be broke during college and be broke right after college, so you can take every
and be
gig,
broke. Yes.
Practice every gig and figure out which way to point your 414s, things like that. As your career, right? As your career has been, moving, up and up and up, over the last 25 years, how do you continue learning? Because you guys are at the sort of the top edge of technology. So how do you find the time? How do you allocate time to continue learning something, a new console, a new plugin, a new microphone? Do you isolate time to do something like that?
I think for me, it has become a series of habits. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, just like you might habitually pick up your phone to read the news, mm-hmm. I will habitually pick up my phone or look at the computer, and it's not as intense as it used to be. I'll admit that, but it is a cursory glance mm-hmm. at the industry news or products that have been released, or now with social media, I don't even have to try. I'm just inundated. If anything, I'm overwhelmed. Yeah. And now I feel again the need to really get up on it with what all's coming out, mm-hmm. And if I see something that looks like it's got some traction and I see it enough, then I'll delve into it and I'll start to learn it. I have chosen purposely not to overwhelm myself. We get to the point where you don't want to be the guy that is always dependent on 100 assistants. Mm-hmm. But I know what I do well, and I mix music well. You know what I mean? I do technology okay. I used to do technology really well. When I was coming up, I teched everything and knew it and did it all. Now I know I want to learn what that plugin is, and I want to learn what it does. Mm-hmm. When we start getting into some of these other areas that are more technology specific, and I'm talking about like networking. Yeah. And some of these things where our industry, clearly you better see where it's not that it's going, it's already there.
It's gone.
Absolutely.
It's gone. And I just did a gig this past week, and I've never heard, and I've done gigs a little bit during COVID, and I must have heard the word Dante 7,000 times.
Right.
It's like it's game over. It's where it is. Or some networking protocol. Someone's going AVB, or they're naming something else. So anyway, the point is, you just make it a habit to stay aware, and then the things that you're really interested in, which for me are mixing things. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be plugins or gear or microphones or something like that, or speaker technology. Those are the things that I really make a point. I don't even make a point. I just can't help but to stay up on now. It's just habit.
Yeah. And I know, Pooch, that, you also, spend a lot of time working in the studio, and that was a lot of time for you to sort of to allocate time and apprentice on all kinds of techniques from, microphone techniques, one of the topics we're going to talk about.
I do. Yeah. I just want to touch on that a little bit too, is that, stay in touch with your peers, mm-hmm. right? Where I learn about new shit is talking to other guys that are mixing at my level. I talk to Toby mm-hmm. Francis on a regular basis, and mm-hmm. every time I talk to that guy, he's always like, hey, have you tried the,
right.
blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, okay, I'll go check it out.
Check that out. Yeah.
Every time I talk to Cookie, he's always like, have you tried this plugin? And I'm like, no, I'll go check it out. So I get driven by my relationships, what I mean, to stay up on whatever the hippest shit is.
And it is the function of staying up on top of your game, right?
Yeah.
You might choose to go more technical, you might choose more creative, and then you go, okay, what do I have to do to continue improving on that? And that's part of your continued learning approach. Sort of going to mix some of the events that you guys are mixing at the stratospheric level that you're at. You come to battle with some specific tools, and we could go through a lot of them, but I'm just going to limit this to just three particular kinds of tools: microphones, your mixing console, and a couple of extra things for processing. Right? There's some the tools of your battle. Right? You're going to deliver this massive sound. I'm curious, Rabold. Everybody, for example, wants to know, well, what color is the Mojave mic that you were using on those drums? And so I was telling Pooch, I'm more interested in your thoughts as to how, when you were coming up, how did you decide, or how did you learn about when to use a condenser mic versus a dynamic mic versus a ribbon mic? Not just a particular brand of mic, but the type of transduction.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, a lot of what Pooch mentioned was early on. It's, in school, I had the opportunity to, I look back on school and I mean, you just do everything wrong. You just don't know,
That's right. It's the
And,
place to fail. Yeah.
Did you
yeah,
make the
and
sound
there
like
with no consequences. Now, conversely, if you're the sound guy at the bar, you can't even call it a music club. It's a bar that has a PA. The stakes are pretty low, and you can screw up there too. So there was a lot of proving grounds as I came up, and I made, and I say the same thing. It's like you will learn far more from screwing up than you will from your successes. So, but I can tell you, as you were talking, the main thing that really stuck in my head, I was fortunate in my early 20s, about 24. I got to the point to where I could spec rigs through a sound company, I mean, for years, my input list changed on the regular. And now it's like, I don't even have to think about it. I know exactly what I'm putting down. I might do something different or try something new or go back to something old. But for years, if it was a microphone line and a manufacturer made it, I tried it on every single source.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I think that I'm just thinking of all the different things that have made it on toms, that made it on guitar cabinets, that were different vocal mics, that were different overhead. I mean, I just literally took advantage of those situations, and I have spec'd everything that finds itself on a live stage often, you
can't overstate what he just said. Well,
Yes,
so here's the thing. Everybody always talks about plugins and consoles and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But the real deal is you should be experimenting with microphones. It's the first acoustic to electric transduction, guys. And those are where you should be experimenting.
Yeah, ding, right? It's like a situation where you and I have been there going, I'm glad you have these 4 plugins here. Perhaps if you try this one mic, you can get away with just one. Or, do you have the right transduction mechanism to capture that finesse or the transient of that? You and I were talking yesterday. I said, Julio Iglesias, AKG 535s, we used that for ages. Probably wouldn't give that to, Bruce on Iron Maiden, right? So it's just that kind of situation. So I think it's important that to our audience to actually burning the time to actually understand, what kind of microphone technology transduction is appropriate for the situation. But it
needs to be in your toolkit, just as plugins are in your toolkit, right? You say, I know this is something that needs a C6. Absolutely. In that same way, you need to have in your toolkit this is why I use a 414 here. Or,
I like what Rabold said about the ability to say, look, I put different mics in front of the same source. And just to see how that worked for you and going, wow, that's not you. That's just cropping out or it's clipping or it doesn't have the high frequency I want, and you went through that process empirically and just goes into your bag of tricks. So that's, it's great.
It's just funny that I mentioned I had a gig last week and at that gig, I won't mention what the microphone was. There was a Leslie that was going to be involved. And I asked them for a certain microphone. And the guy asked me, he's like, oh, you like those? And I was like, no, I actually hate them. I said, they're really dull. And that's why I put them on Leslie's, is they help de-shrill. Yeah. Sure. They soften the inherently ice pick tonality of, so you see what I'm saying? So it's like, absolutely. I even found mics that I didn't like that I went, ooh, I know where I can use that. And I now use, and vice versa. So
the same thing applies. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Rahul.
Go ahead.
This continues in as your career is building. Like you have to be ballsy. I'm ballsy in that I have an input that sounds amazing, and I take that mic away and put something else there sometimes because somebody said to me, "Hey, you should try that on guitars." I went, "Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to try it on the guitar."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you have to have enough passion to want to continue your experience to learn whatever the newest stuff
Yeah,
is.
same thing applies to the making sure you know all the patterns on when you want to use a cardio or you want to use a very tight pattern, or you're gonna try to capture something with a figure eight or whatever. Are you recording? Are you not recording? That comes to be of a valuable piece of information. And obviously also considering some of the monitor engineers that you guys, big shout out to Tater, big shout out to Ramon Morales. Those two super monitor engineers, there's a collaboration there when you go, is this the right mic for the application?
Well, I was getting ready to say something too, because, you mentioned the studio earlier. In the studio, I'm not saying there's not a host of personalities you have to deal with, but it's typically far more pared down than what we deal with on the road. It's the band, it's the engineer, it's the producer, and then you might have some other assortment of people. Once you get into live sound, there's two engineers. There's a tech, there's the player, there's all these different people, and everyone is some degree closer to the artist's ear, and to you never quite know who's doing what. And for instance, we're talking about this, and you mentioned the relationship with monitor engineers. One of the things that I know to do too is I will always, if it's like a real quote unquote gig, and we can have multiple mics on single sources. Input one of guitar for me is always an SM57. And that is because I know what I can do with an SM57.
Yes.
I also know every monitor guy on earth is not going to roll his eyes at, right, Pooch? They're not they're going to accept it. Yes. Every artist is going to look over there and go, okay, I know that. Like as soon as you only have esoteric mic, like that's just someone's easy way of bitching about something. So there's not only do I know, and I like 57s, they work.
Yeah.
But 57 goes one, and then something cool goes on the second. And I might blend them, or I might only use the second. So it's not only for its technical application, it's for its political application as well.
Absolutely. It brings up a comfort of appreciation and calms everybody down going, we're good. This is okay. As opposed to putting a very fancy ribbon mic that we go, what is that thing?
Right.
Absolutely. No, I love that idea. And I think it's important that people keep experimenting because, microphone technology, you guys are using some very cool mics, that maybe, 10 years ago, nobody would have thought of taking that on the road. So that's kind of a cool thing nowadays.
The other thing, Rabold, sorry to interrupt you. The other thing, Rabold, that you brought up was about microphone patterns and how important that is and how that affects the monitor engineer, affects them more than it affects you in some ways, especially when we're talking about the loudest input in your mix, the vocal microphone. If you are choosing a vocal microphone that has a super tight pattern, super cardioid or whatever, you might be boning the monitor guy by turning that into the lightsaber of sound, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So those are conversations, and you may be able to make a compromise and say, okay, well, let's use the cardioid capsule so that you aren't going to get yelled at, because those guys all have things in their ears that are connected directly to their ears.
Yeah, and you have to be a little bit of the Henry Kissinger of, peace. So everybody kind of, it's happy and going, I can deal with this, you can deal with that, everybody's happy. So it's something as a front of house guy you need to take into account, just like what Chris said. There's other people involved. It's not just you. Yeah. The other most important tool in your arsenal to deliver the kind of shows that you're working with is your mixing platform. And we're going to, all of you guys, both of you guys and your monitor partners are working on Digital SD7s. A huge shout out to our friend Matt Larson. Hope you're doing well in Minneapolis, not freezing off.
Best salesman of all time.
The man. I look forward to seeing you at Summerfest, buddy. And so, not just to talk about the SD7, I'm more interested in the fact that at the level that you are mixing, the platform that you mix on has a list of requirements that is pretty staggering, in the sense that and I'd love you to chime on this because, like, let's take, for example, a Bruno Mars show, Chris. How many inputs fader-wise did you land on that?
As far as inputs off the list, let me give you that. That might be easier.
Yeah.
I think we ended up with like 120. For some reason, 127 comes to mind. I don't know. 120, a bunch.
A lot.
A lot.
That's landed
Yes.
inputs from the stage, right?
That is
Like,
from that. That is right.
Yes.
That's a lot, right? That and you, you know, you're landing 64 on Maiden, and by the time you add effects, you're basically into the 100. You know.
Yeah, Jay-Z was something like 135 or something total.
So that right there kind of separates some consoles from others, right? You go, okay, this one or this one or that one. And all of a sudden, there's not that many that will get there, let alone sonic quality on the preamp, right? Probably very. Is that a very important factor for you, or are you just taking everything in digital nowadays? You still, the preamp is important to you.
Oh, I mean, for me, it's what it's all about, and it's part of the reason that I use Digico specifically is because their preamps are so transparent. I feel like they're, you know, with the new 32-bit cards, there is some coloration now, which is actually coloration that I like. But believe it or not, I keep some of the old school cards in stage racks for things that I want to be super transparent. And it's one of the reasons that I chose that, because some other platforms, some other manufacturers have very colored front end. And that's cool. And that, you know, people enjoy that and they, you know, whatever. But from my point of view, it gives me a blanker slate. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, totally. It's specifically for Digico. The lack of color traditionally is what's made it the ultimate palette, because it's the smoothest, blankest palette, and you get to choose whichever way you want to go. In fact, here recently, Pooch and I have got this project we're working on together where we actually need audio to show to people. And I was sourcing tracks instead of us just talking about it, which we which is weird. We now do this very well. In theory, we know how to mix. And so
I don't know though. It's been
I don't either. I'm making no promises. But anyway, I was sourcing tracks and I was really trying hard to get stuff from a Digico for that reason, because I knew, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it here, if it wasn't for this one particular act, if I wasn't getting Digico tracks of the ones I was willing to look at from this particular era, it was going to be older, hear me say older, Avid tracks. And I know the coloration that comes with those. And I thought to myself, God, it's fine. They're going to be clean. It's going to be clean audio, but it's going to have that sound. I really wish I could just have the cleaner Digico sound, you know. And now, like Pooch has said, and Pooch has way more miles on the 32-bit cards than I do, but I've now have a little bit. We just were reticent to. We wouldn't update the Bruno rig forever because we never stopped. I mean, it was just you go from tour. You go from tour into, like, you know, a wedding band once a month, and I'm like, when are we going to stop and redo it? So, anyways, it's true. It's true. That's how he rolls. I mean, our rig has been put together since 2016.
Wow.
You know, yeah. So,
which is good, and it speaks to the fact that it's also reliable and visionary. You know,
that
which
too.
is important. You know, it's a good thing for you guys. You guys, either of you sharing preamps with your super monitor guys? You share any preamps? Yeah. Okay.
I've never done it.
You don't. Okay.
This is where we differ. I always, not always. I would say in the last 5 years, I have decided to share preamps with whoever I work, if I trust them.
It's kind of funny because in my TV music world, you know, mixing these TV award Latin shows, I get, like you said at the beginning, it's like, here's your 2 Dante feeds and you're getting all the 128 inputs. That's it. There's nothing. It's like you get nobody, and you never get asked about the microphones. The truck person is making the call, and then maybe the monitor person. You will get whatever mic they choose for you, and here's your Dante feed, and you don't get a preamp either. It's like, great.
Good luck. We're all counting on you.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. No pressure.
You're only mixing for the house. You know, the way you craft it, we're going to talk a little bit about this when we get into the nuts and bolts of mixing, but from the console perspective, you also need a console that, reliability, double power supply, blah, blah, blah. But metering, Pooch and I, you were talking the other day about I miss mixing on the Gamble, not just for the preamp and the EQ, but because of the meter bridge. You had all those meters right there. How much do you rely on your input or buzzing metering? Is that on the console? That's critical for you?
So Chris and I differ on this a little bit too. Chris is like hip to knowing what's happening exactly on his metering. He's talked several times in our Pooch and Rabold thing about how, he's paying attention to stuff. I'm way more lax about that on the input side. So my inputs, I am gaining things up and listening to them and not so much paying attention to the meter. I'm paying attention to obviously, fader resolution and how it sounds. That's important. But I don't look at it and go, okay, I want all my inputs to be at -20, which is not what Chris does either. But he's way more
close
thinking about that kind of shit, right?
Yeah. It's close to what I do.
Okay. But I am, fader resolution, gain up, and whatever sounds good on the mic pre is kind of where things end up. And sometimes I use digital trim because the mic pre sounds better, hotter, or
right.
less.
And you tend to drive them pretty hot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes, it depends, especially if I want something colored on the 32-bit cards, if you start hitting them harder, they start having a kind of a biasing thing like old school XL4 used to.
Sure.
So turning the mic pre up more gets kind of that sound that you want. And then to make the fader resolution be 0, you take digital trim and turn it down.
Yeah.
I do some of that. But when metering becomes important to me is summing. After all of my inputs, then it's I pay great attention to whenever things are getting summed and the overall result of where that ends up.
So you need a platform mixing wise where you can you can see all your bus metering at all times.
That is important to me. And I do, with Digico, I drag on the overview screen is all kinds of bussing.
Sure.
So that I can see what's up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris?
Well, Raul, you mentioned the, the gold standard of metering, which was the Gamble. And honestly, to me, it's neck and neck. I so highly valued the XL4 meter bridge, even its placement, the fact that it stood, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's one of the greatest things that Digico did with their consoles. And when the D5 came out, and then in turn with the SD7, of course the SD5 does it too, is that meter bridge. I had a gig earlier in COVID, and it was a nothing gig. It was like piano and vocal, and I had a 7 or a 5, and someone was like, "What, could a SD11 not do it?" And I was like, "It absolutely can. I'm blind.
Yeah.
I'm not super blind, but my eyes are not getting any better, and I like my meter bridge." And just yesterday, I've had to get over myself in this way that I'm embarrassed to spec. Sometimes yesterday, I have a gig coming up where it is. This one portion of a gig is just going to be some playback and then maybe 4 vocals. I asked for an SD7, and you know why?
You got it.
I did. Yeah. Now I also know that this gig is going to
brat.
Totally. And I know so many people hearing this right now are just completely disgusted at themselves.
Delete.
But I'll tell you what, man, here's the deal. That's what I use.
Yeah.
That's just the platform that I use. The meter bridge is what I'm speccing.
Yeah.
And SD11 can 1,000% do everything I need it to do.
Absolutely.
And on an ergonomics level, not just the main master section with the 12 faders, but the section above it.
Yes,
on
the
an
small
SD7,
faders are what matters.
The small faders are invaluable when it comes to all the extra shit that gets thrown your way in certain scenarios to, again, keep an eye on things. So, to me, metering is of paramount.
I think it's difficult for people sometimes to kind of get a clear picture of the fact that you are sort of looking at hundreds of things happening at once. And then that's the part where you need to, it's like flying. I was telling Pooch, I said, look, if you're going to fly a plane from here to LA, it's one thing. But if you're going to Mars, your spaceship needs a few more things in front of you,
Yeah.
right? You need to be
Right.
monitoring a few more things.
Yeah.
And same thing, you're flying the spaceship to Mars, no pun intended, on your tours.
Mhm.
But the amount of visual cues and information that you're getting, it's not just what you hear. Sometimes you hear something and you need to very quickly see a visual cue to tell you what's going on.
Right.
And hear this, that, yes, we are blessed and get to work on some of the best gear in the world, but also when Chris and I go do Bob's Backyard Barbecue, I did a iTunes gig once where they literally handed me a Mackie and I had to get a result, right?
Totally.
So it's not, yes,
Yes.
we're blessed. We get the best gear. And when we can spec it, we do. But
Yes.
we are like you guys.
Yes.
We have to make it sound good on whatever we get.
And that being said, Pooch, and I'll say this here, I know you both have been working on Digicast a long time. I think, Chris, you probably started on the D5 back in 2005. But you have also burned hundreds, thousands of hours learning every detail of your platform, whatever platform is that you're mixing on. So you're not showing up to production rehearsal kind of, let me figure this console out. So we've run into, me as a system engineer, sometimes with our demo rigs, when we're on the field, we've had people request, a whatever, I need this console. And then they show up and go, hey, can you help me program this thing? I'm going, no, I don't know that console.
It's just crazy to me.
But it happens more than we think it happens, right? And so it's something to be aware of. I think other things that for you guys, I know you guys do a lot of prep work ahead of time. Obviously, the offline editor, snapshot control for you guys, pretty heavy. Are you a lot into snapshot? I don't know on Maiden if you're doing a lot of snapshotting or not.
This is a great conversation. Chris and I differ on this a little bit too, but I'm a one snapshot per song guy, unless there is more parameter changes than I can do manually from verse to chorus or whatever, which happens on I would say a 20% basis. So if you're looking at my snapshots, you'll see song, and then 6 snapshots for one song. You know what I mean? So it's not like I don't ever make other snapshots for stuff. And then how we build our snapshots, Chris and I have had this conversation on our Pooch and Rabold thing. We build them differently. I tend to start in the full safe mode, and then only unsafe things that I want to change as I'm going. And that includes even to the depth of individual channel unsafing of just the EQ of that individual channel to change. So, and it just works in my head. I don't want anything changing or recalling on my console. Let me be clear about that, because I record, everything gets recorded. What recalls is what I make changes to. And so, Chris, take it from there. How's your mode of operation?
Yeah, I know. I was trying to think, because again, I just did a gig. I keep saying that. It's just I'm so excited to be able to say it. And it was. And I started building snapshots in the middle of it. We don't differ too much.
No, we don't.
I mean, like, I start with, like you said, the point for everyone to hear is that automation is being written continuously. It's what we choose to then activate, and so, like, I start with everything. I'll usually do it on a double layer basis. I'll go into the global scope will be pretty much wide open where everything's being written. I may, and this actually bit me in the ass the other day because I didn't do it, and I know better. I usually do it. I go in and I'll turn off the gains.
Yeah, I was just going to say, my pre's will screw you over.
On global scope. Yes. Those will be the only things turned off, and unless there's something else I know I'm just not going to use. But everything has the ability to be written. Then I'll go in and I'll do it one of two ways, but in the global scope, in the recall scope per song, I might turn some things on in there initially, but then the next, or I might not, it might all be X'd out. But then the next step is I go onto the channel and I safe all of those channels.
Yeah.
So we do a song. I don't write anything. I don't. For a while I just mix. But then once we start running songs, I'll start saving, but I won't turn anything on. What I might do at that time, and like what I did the other day, is I went in and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm ready to engage fader and mute on these certain things.
That's right.
And it's a double layer move. I go into the recall scope, I turn it on there, then I go to the channel and take it out of safe there. So again, you hear what Pooch and I are saying too. It's, if anything, we're like insanely cautious to not have anything do something.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
It's almost approaching analog mode.
And it just depends, for me, it depends on the nature of the show. What do I need to do? I'd love it if I can just keep it to fader and mute, but chances are EQ is going to come into play. You know, dynamics, I hope I don't have to automate dynamics, but there's a few kind of inputs that might call for that, you know, panning maybe, but do I go deep into it? I do, but it's usually just one per song. But no, there's usually a lot going on. It just depends on the act. It depends on how intricate it is.
And speaking of checking all your snapshots, you know, microphones, mixing consoles, a couple of extra tools, you know, to hammer out your gig. You know, you carry a few pieces of analog outboard gear. You also use a couple of live racks, I believe. And then Pooch, you have wave servers. You also have a Bricasti, a couple of reverbs. And we were talking about extra tools outside in the toolbox. The one that was kind of key was the ability to have a virtual sound check system. And I said, we were talking about this, and I said, what if you showed up tomorrow and you had a choice? You can have your Bricastis or you can have your virtual sound check system. What are you going to choose?
That's not even a question.
It's not even a question.
No.
Right.
So have fun with the Bricastis, because I'm taking the virtual sound check.
Right. So at your level, it's become not just an extra tool, it's become a fundamental part of your process, would you say?
It's so ingrained in me that like I carry around an MGB with me because I'm worried that someone's not going to have it when I show up to a gig. I mean, it is even for a one-off, that time period between that sound check and doors, I spend with virtual sound check just fixing the little things. It's the little things that matter, not the big picture, right? It's the gate, making sure that all the gates on all your drums are you know, triggering properly. You know, all of that is, you need virtual sound check in order to, you know, get all those things working. So virtual sound check is, I even told you, I think yesterday, that if you offered me virtual sound check and an M32 or Digico without virtual sound check, I'd take the M32.
I 1000% agree with that statement.
Yep.
And for the audience, just remember that your artists are not coming to sound check. Let's clarify that for the audience. I said, look, there is no band coming to sound check, number one. But number two, I mean, I've always tell all of the grad students that I work with, I said, look, record everything. When you start mixing in your career, just because of technology costs is coming down, just record everything that you're doing. And if you don't have the ability to record 64 tracks, just record your music bus and your vocal bus, so you have an idea of where you are after you got done with rehearsal. Just record and go back and listen.
Here's the thing, man. The difference between a great engineer and a world-class engineer is about 10%. It's the little tiny details that, Chris does in order to make his mix be world-class that he couldn't do without virtual sound check. I look back on my career and I'm like, I have no idea how I functioned without.
But if you think back to
check.
20 years ago on that Kiss tour in Australia, we had sound checks that went for an hour and a half.
Yeah, but even at that though,
it's not the sound check.
It's sitting with a pair of headphones and getting the super detailed stuff. Right. And now here, 20 years later, speaker technology is so damn good.
Yes.
It's like having a pair of near fields in front of you. So you better have it record quality. And if you don't, then you're just a great engineer. You're not a world-class engineer.
That's a great intro into our mixing conversation. What you guys have Pooch, you're dealing with the band that is the iconic heavy metal band that we all grew up with. In Latin America, it's staying great. When you're a child, you must listen to Iron Maiden. and Rabold, the list of Grammys between the artists that you have been mixing is just staggering, which is
don't ask me how that happened.
Well, I was looking at a picture on a magazine like 3 days ago, and there were 4 tours featuring that page, and 3 of those mega tours you have been mixing on rotation.
Yeah, it's weird. If anything, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. COVID has kind of scared me because the past decade I haven't stopped. And now I'm like, oh shit. Like I do what? I do who with what? I'm like, you know what I mean? It was better when it was just, I was just the hamster on the wheel and just kept going.
Nowhere to hide now, buddy.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful.
Yeah. So what is when you start approaching these mega projects, what is your mix goal? Are you gonna recreate the CD? Are you gonna make it a total live experience? Do the artists come and tell you this is how I want it? How does that happen at the stratospheric level you're at?
Okay, for me, I think it's a little bit different. I mean, maybe not, but here I work for an iconic band. I work for a band that when I was 16 years old, I was in my room with Circus Magazine posters on the wall of Steve Harris,
right,
listening to this band. And so people that were 16 then are now in their mid 50s and coming to shows, and they've heard the same song for 35 years.
Right.
And they expect it to sound like the record that they heard, when they were 16 years old and through that time period. So I use the term, I like to make a record mix with impact. Okay. So it means it sounds like the record, like I am shooting for it to sound like the record, but to have maybe a little bit more slanted low end to try to move some air in the room.
Sure.
Which is a difficult thing with Iron Maiden, by the way.
Right.
They don't have any instruments that make low end. So, I shoot for record quality with impact. What's your goal there, Chris?
Yeah. And, I've always liked that statement of yours, that phrase of yours. I would mimic that in that I want record quality, meaning I don't just want to be, I had this conversation with someone yesterday. I don't just want to be like a good sounding live show because that is one thing. I want to be I just want to be a top tier, high end oral experience all around within the realms of what we can do. Let's be honest. Again,
sure.
I often talk about the fact that we mix in concrete barns. Like, let's everybody get real,
Yeah.
But I do shoot for that as far as that level of quality, that level of performance. And I'm at a point now, and I don't want to get too in the ether, too artsy about it all, but I almost don't even think about how I'm going to do it or what I'm trying to do. I just kind of know based on the client.
Yeah.
Like, I'll know, do they want the record?
Yep.
Or do they want a live show based on the record? Do they not care at all? There's this kind of thing where you just know what to do. And I'll say this too, as time has gone on, I've begun to realize I can also listen to an arrangement and go, everything matters. Everything that's happening matters. So everything needs to be heard. Let's start there, or this is a mess. They don't know what they want. That's garbage. Lose that. Like, there's all these different various bits of nuance that teach. I'm just going to tell you this. I'm going to take it, and the biggest, harshest critic I'm going to run across for the whole duration of when I work for that artist is going to be myself.
Yeah, for sure.
And I just have a bar set where it is. As far as what they want, it's genre specific, it's artist specific, it's
and do you tend to get a significant input from the artist or their management or their production team, whoever?
You'll know it before you step foot behind a piece of gear.
Absolutely.
What the vibe
You'll know
is.
who's important for sure.
So I think for the audience, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
The other thing that I wanted to point out about that was it's Have you, Chris, have you ever like a year and a half into a tour gone back and compared your mix to what the record is? I do that a lot sometimes.
Yes.
And it's interesting. The direction that I've gone is away from the record. Like it's definitely the piece of the record is there, and it's enough that everyone is like, gets it that, it is kind of like the record. But what's great about what we do is I get to kind of put my spin on it a little bit. And as a tour goes on, it kind of goes that direction.
Always.
But sometimes a year and a half in, I'll listen to it and go, oh, I've gone too far.
Yeah. Or I'll realize, or I'll think to myself, man, how have they been okay with me not featuring that sound?
Yeah, right.
I've had that happen before.
Yeah.
How did I get away with that? Nobody called me on that.
No one's called me out on it, or have they been pissed for a year and a half? Yeah.
No,
But see, the other part of that is that some artists don't want it to be exactly like the record. They like that it's got a little difference,
Yep.
And so, if you head down that road and you get there, the artist may already be going, oh, that's cool. He does that one thing that's not on the record, or whatever.
I had an artist, I'll go ahead and say, I was working with, when I first started working with Bruno, several years ago, they weren't even done mixing the record, and we're in promo because we're gearing up for the TV stuff and this and that. And it's like, that's a tough camp. I didn't show up to fanfare being carried in on, it's not what you think.
Welcome, Chris Rabold.
Yeah, no, it's trial by fire.
We're not worth it.
No, man, those guys are,
right.
They're like, what do you got?
Yeah, they're sharks, totally. And so they're like, at the beginning, they're kind of like, eh. And then after a while, they're starting to warm up, and like there was, of course, like things kind of working. I remember we were in this one studio that sounded terrible. We moved studios. I swear to God, I didn't touch a thing. Guess what? Suddenly was way better. The mix. I hadn't done a damn thing. It was the room.
Of course.
Anyway, after a while, I finally heard not even the finished version of the song that we were working on, but just the latest version.
Yeah.
And I just looked at him and I'm like, how have you not fired me yet? Because what I'm doing sounds nothing like this, because the stems we had sounded nothing like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't remember where this started, but as far as like knowing the source, I've been just like, dude, I'm nowhere close, but also you guys put me nowhere close.
And it'd be good for the audience to realize that at that level of touring there in general, there's going to be certain amount of production rehearsal that could be, 3 days, or it could be 3 weeks or whatnot. And I think that, Pooch and I, you have talked about this before, which is that I think a lot of people think that because you have 3 weeks of production rehearsals, you can show up unprepared and just figure it out when you get there. You guys are probably two of the most disciplined engineers in the business. And I know that when you come to the first day of production rehearsal, you are 90% of, offline editing. You got your sources sorted out. You got a lot of stuff. And I think people also forget that even though there is no general audience at these production rehearsals, the audience that you do have, the artist, the management, the band members, the musical director, has a very important opinion. So you have to deliver very quickly. So I'd be curious to talk about, the process of when you're crafting your mix, how, when you get into production rehearsals, how fast, you have to be able to deliver a good mix.
Oh, it's right away. I mean, the real deal is, people always say, oh, well, you have 3 weeks of rehearsal before a tour. But I tell you what, if you don't have your shit together in the first day or two, and an artist wants to come in after the second day, if it doesn't kind of already be pumping, you're gone. I mean, so, I am held to the same standard that other people are without the 3 weeks of rehearsal. It's the next 2 weeks after that is when I do the little things, right? The, spreading things out and making more room for vocal, and the little things that they may not even notice that I'm doing in order to create. But getting the badass mix is like by day 2.
Yeah. I would assume, it's like, I remember being on production rehearsals with Kravitz and Dave Natal, and it's like day one, and it's like, Kravitz would sit and, Dave had been working on the snare for 5 seconds. He goes, "Are you done
Let's
yet?"
hear it. Yeah.
And it's like kind of a thing, right? Where I think people sometimes forget the amount of stress that you guys run into when you walk into that production rehearsals. There's a level of expectation to deliver whatever that is.
I have strategically placed cases in rooms, like nowadays with playback and the way rehearsals run now. If we're not always, we might not be starting rehearsal in front of PA. We might be starting rehearsals in a near field situation. I have strategically placed cases in trash cans so that when the artist walks in the room, the feng shui of the room directs them to something of a decent listening environment. Or, and I think I've mentioned this on the show before, if you ever have to do a show and there is the goddamn creative table, which is where all these, whatever the super important people are, like you're in the arena, I have gone and moved that table before they show up in anticipation of the artist walking in, sitting down, smoking a cigarette, looking at their phone, casually listening, like be ready, be ready.
And you never know who else is coming with them that is influential to their ear,
and who might be like, this new guy, it sounds really good, because you don't know. Be ready, it matters, and it's going to matter quick.
Something important there on all the work that you have to do, not just on earphones, for sometimes on headphones, and we have talked about this before, which is the importance of knowing and trusting your mix on headphones and earphones. Because in other words, you could be chasing your mix forever. You need to know on headphones or earphones, because you're not going to be mixing on PA for a while. You need to know, the way the mix is actually, working out. Do you recall at what point in time in your career you kind of went, I've got a method. I know that what I'm hearing on my headphones or my earphones it's a good mix. It's a CD quality mix or close to, that will translate into the PA.
That's a great question.
It's when speaker technology finally got pretty linear. Then I was like, okay, a pair of near fields, that's pretty linear. If I get it right on that, it's going to translate well. At least for me. What were you going to say, Chris? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that's a great question. And I would like to tell you it was 20 years ago and it wasn't.
20 years ago, we were still high-fiving if you could hear the vocal.
Yeah. Yeah, it really wasn't that long ago.
Right.
Like for me, I kind of have I have a formula. I have yet again a series of habits that get me there. But yeah, I really think it was in the last, 10.
Yeah.
That the PAs have caught up. I know what near fields to use. I know what headphones to use. I know what tuning process to use. I would like to tell you it really wasn't that long ago, because all things weren't equal,
And the point to the audience that I'm trying to make is it's fundamental that you learn the process by whichever way you get there, that you figure out that the mix that you're hearing on your cans or your near fields is a good enough CD quality mix that is going to ultimately translate. Because if you don't know how to judge that, you could keep twisting knobs for days on end.
Yeah, and this is where we get into, people will ask myself and Pooch, because we've now put ourselves out there to the degree that we have, about certain mixing techniques live. And if you'll follow one series of repetitiveness that we have, is that, my mix needs to work on this laptop underneath my finger as much as it needs to work on the PA. And they really don't vary. There's not a lot of variance in that.
Right.
And if you start doing things specific, you will inherently, you will be in a bad room. You will be in an underpowered PA. You will blah, 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 blah. But the more you can keep your own process streamlined, I just don't see why people make things so damn hard on themselves. Like, just have a mix. Just that's your mix, and let it, and be always thinking that it should translate in whatever medium it could possibly end up on. And that's something, if people really listen closely, they'll hear us harp on.
Yeah, absolutely. In one of the previous sessions that we had Pooch here, we talked about target curves. And I know, Chris, that you are yourself a tweakaholic of system tuning, even though you have worked with some of the great system engineers of our time, like Solly, you know, and big shout out to him. One of the topics that I like people to be aware is that, you know, what I call do not chase the PA on your mix. In other words, remember, once you got done with production rehearsals, you pretty much have a dialed mix kind of, you know, do not fix the PA on your mix. I've seen that many times where we have incoming engineers who are continuously changing the mix that they recalled that day. And they're just chasing something that is part of the PA as opposed to actually talking to the system engineer or having a target curve to mix to. How does that affect you? You keep your mix pretty static and you have a target curve?
Yeah, I mean, I refer to it as, you know, the production manager calling me. I need to call him back later. The separation of church and state. Like
you have a gig. You have a gig.
I know my mix is what it is. Right. And I know it, and I know it, and I know it, and I know it. So when the PA comes on, it really is having that inner calm. That's what happens is guys might know their mix intimately, yet when it starts coming out, it's not right. And they panic and they want to fix it really quickly. And that's when you need to be professional enough to go, not arrogant enough to go, it's not me, but to go, no, I know my mix doesn't do that.
That collaborative relationship, sort of a symbiotic thing with your system engineer. Pooch's case with me, then you have two system engineers, you know, but you and I have talked a lot about the importance of that symbiotic relationship so that your mix translates properly, you know, but don't go chasing, don't go destroying your hard work from production rehearsals, you know?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, just to touch on this real quick, my mix stays the same. It's the PA part that I change from day to day on what's going on around the room. But I just want to take us back one more step from when we were talking about one mix. Also, a super big gig keeper is once you deliver your mix to anyone, go see where the end result is. Because I can't tell you 100 times I've gone to Videoland and I've handed them 2 cables that is my mix, and what they've done to it is unbelievable. Like, you know, distorted, panned all the way right, you know, all these kind of things. And that is the end result of what that artist is going to watch.
Right.
And that artist is going to watch it and go, well, why is this guy's my sound guy? Like, seriously, you know? So it's important. I just wanted to touch on that. You know, we went off on a tangent here, but I wanted to say to you that I always tell all of my techs, if you hand my mix to anyone, find out where it's going, and we need to hear the end result of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Always good to have somebody you trust on your team, and I think that's key because you know you spend a lot of time crafting your mix, and so it's important to make sure that the ultimate medium is delivering what you have, you know, worked on so hard. And so that's important.
But back to the PA thing. Yeah, I'm the guy that, you know, and I know Chris is this guy too. We have worked hours and hours and hours on what's coming out of our left and right. Right. Yeah. And we know it intimately. And so when we're talking about, you know, EQing and those kind of things, it's never on the mix, you know, it's always creating that mix, and that mix now goes to speaker processor. And in the speaker processor is where we make decisions and major decisions about what's going to come out of the big speakers.
Right.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's dig into a couple of topics related, more nuts and bolts of your actual mixing process, if you will. Let's talk for a minute. We have all talked about this before, but on the input side of things, the importance of starting with a good source. We touched a little bit about this earlier. I'm kind of curious. Do you guys go to the stage and retweak the mics for pretty much every gig, or how does that work? The importance of having a good source when you start.
Chris?
Yeah. Well, this is 75 hours of conversation right here, to be honest with you. But
I'll take the 5-second version.
To answer your question, before we get to the mic, I will walk and listen to the source And there's an art in doing that too, to where you're not doing it in too much of a judgy way. It's typically if I can find the right political moment to have a casual conversation with each player, if I haven't done it beforehand, unless it's just some gigantic band, you can't make it to everyone, about their amp, about their tone, about their whatever it might be, whatever the instrument might be, to kind of get an idea,
Right.
If you have the time, if it's a throw and go, man, you're just going. It's like you saying you're getting your Dante lines and you don't even know what the mic is, and you got to mix and you got to go.
Yep.
But I will do as much research as I can as to what I'm getting before I get it. I can oftentimes go ahead and tell you from the input I get back, and I mean like input, like verbal conversation, email, stories from others on what the player is going to be before it even turns on. Now, as far as with those individual sounds, as far as the microphone placement, I have very specific standard starting spots. And I tell all my guys, all my stage guys, I'm like, I'll show them exactly where I want the stand, exactly where I want the clip, exactly where I'm like, you get me ballpark every day. Make it your goal to where I don't touch anything, but I'm probably going to tweak anyway. But just sometimes I just move it right where you just had it. Make that your like smile, But I know where I like to mic a guitar cabinet, and I know where I'm going to start. Will I change it if that's not working? Of course, 100%. But and this goes back to like knowing your microphones. Well, knowing your microphone placement. Know your default.
And do you experiment a little bit during production rehearsals? You might go, okay,
I will.
Move things a little bit, or maybe
I will.
switch them. Good.
Yep.
Butch, I know you're tweaking about your drum mics.
About all my mics. I mean, I am, listen, I trust my techs to do the best that they can. But even at that, I have found in the past that I'll show up on stage and look at microphones, and they'll be, a half an inch away from where I need it to be. And a half an inch in a guitar cabinet, for example, is a lot miles different in tone. I do the same thing. Guys set it up, and I come back behind them and have a look at it every single day. I cannot stress enough, nobody talks about this, but when I have a sound company that shows up with shitty stands, I want to stab them in the face. Like a stand is just as important as the microphone.
Or crappy mics, mics have been beaten
well, that
up,
too.
Like,
but to me, the number one thing that I always see from a one-off, standpoint is a guy shows up with a case full of stands that look like, they've just been beat up, and they, the arms slowly fall down.
They all droop. None of the tripods will stay firm. Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, the most important thing is mic choice, mic placement. So if you're not giving me the tools to keep that microphone in that placement, that is so important, then why are we here? Right?
So there you go. If your mic stands are covered on duct tape, thou shalt not bring them to your gig.
I can't stress enough to people out there, sound companies out there, the having a great mic stand is just as important as the microphone.
Good. So obviously these all ties, I would guess that the input metering side of things could immediately tell you when something is either in the wrong place, or maybe the mic is dead now, or something is whatever. So there's a relationship there where I think you guys have gotten to that level where you could intrinsically look at your metering and go, something is off at the input side.
Oh yeah, definitely. When I said earlier that I don't really look at input metering, here's where I differ. Once we get going, input metering to me is the tool that I use to be like, something's wrong. I need to go see what's going on. That's 3 dB hotter today or 3 dB less today. So I memorize where all my inputs are and where they, over a course of the first month of a tour, I know exactly where my input meters are, so that I know when something is not working properly.
Or, you see somebody plug a keyboard in, and the left channel has this going on. And there's, it's like, okay, but before you even know it, you're like, guys, something's up.
Right. What in the, on the ST7s, you guys have a plethora of tools on the input strip. Would you say you're high pass? Are you a heavy user of high pass, low pass? Is that a key thing for you, or you go, maybe not? It's like I've always found into a lot of one-off gigs that it's the most underused tool in the input is the high pass.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all over the internet. My 4 tools are mic choice, mic placement, high pass filter, low pass filter. You give me those 4 and I'll create you a mix. I don't need EQ or dynamic or anything to get you a usable something. Is those 4 tools. So is a low pass filter and a high pass filter important to me? It's right after what microphone.
Right. Yeah. Is there something, Chris, that you don't high pass? Nowadays we have, subwoofer system, you guys have used, you're on CP218s, we use G28s, things that go down to like 25 hertz. Are there things that you don't high pass?
Yeah, before I answer that question, and I'm here to, I like to think Pooch and I are good about there are no rules, because there aren't. But when I hear a high pass is the most underutilized, I'm like, who's that?
Who's that?
And what are they doing behind the console?
Yeah. We have gotten phone calls. This is true stories. I'm not going to mention any names or companies. Where look, this guy's like, hey man, he's saying that your PA is not loud enough. You don't have enough subs. Your subs are always limited. And I go, look, go to your input channels, put them all, engage all the high passes at 20 hertz. Oh, look, all the limiters are now gone. Like, funny how that works.
Yeah. And it's also, for like a younger engineer who's not utilizing, man, you guys don't know how lucky you are, because we had fixed, it might have been a 12 dB per octave at 80, which good luck.
Yes,
you know what I mean? So are there things that I don't? Yes, there are. Actually, there's a lot that I don't. It's funny, Pooch and I did an episode on high passes, and I was telling him that I didn't high pass my toms, and he was like, "Really?" And I don't usually high pass. I'll high pass them if there is mechanical noise from a stand.
Sure.
It's making like a low end rumble. Bass guitars, I may or may not, I don't want to go through them all. Yeah, there are some things I don't, but I'll tell you this: if I don't, I'm strategically not doing it. It's not.
It's not accidental.
It's not. It's 100% on purpose that I'm not doing it.
Sure.
Part of my default when I show up to a one-off is all high pass filters engaged.
Yeah.
Same thing.
And at a specific frequency point. Like I've already got things rolled up.
Exactly. Yeah.
For TV shows, I have to. I mean, I don't have a choice. I still like you can't have that in the house.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. You use several wave servers, and you got UA on your stuff plus analog stuff. The SD7 itself in the input strip, several choices of EQ, comp. So I'm kind of curious, not as to what you're using, but when you go through the process of, am I going to use the internal compressor or EQ or dynamic EQ on the channel? Or am I going to use a plugin from my server? Or am I going to plug in an analog device? Do you have a process by which you go, how do I decide? Am I going to use the one on the strip? And this is, of course, assuming that you have all of these choices. If you right. I don't have those choices, so I'm going to use what's on the strip. But if you have all of these, 3 categories, what's on the strip, or what's on the server or the analog rack, how do you go about deciding which one you're going to choose?
You want to do that one first, Pooch?
Sure. I mean, for me, anything outboard of a console is the cayenne pepper in the chili, right? So the chili is being made over here, and it's got all the ingredients and all the stuff that I need. But man, would this be so much better if it had a little cayenne pepper in it? So it's not the go-to. As much as I'm known as the plugin guy, it's like those are afterthought stuff. So my go-to is generally console things, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't have to worry about a latency. If on gating, the side chain for that is super easy. I don't have to have 3 paths to an outboard.
Yeah, it should be good to mention to the audience that in your particular case now on this tour, you are triggering your gates, externally. So that's a little advanced topic that you all can go check out the YouTube channel on that. But yeah, you're how many channels are you triggering?
There's 9 toms.
9 toms. So that's another 9 triggers that are coming down on your snake system, and you use
Correct.
the internal gate to, with an external trigger to open those gates. So that's
Correct.
That's
And we're not triggering sounds. We're triggering
Right.
the threshold of the gate.
Yeah, it's opening the gate.
And Chris does that as well in all of his drum kits.
Yeah.
But so hear me when I say I go to a console first. And even with compression, like for instance on a keyboard, for instance, if I have 16 stereo channels of keyboards, my go-to is not to send all those paths out to waves because I want a super cool compressor. I'm using what's happening in the console, and now more and more, with the console technology, like Yamaha with their Neve, internal Neve processing with Digico, with now they're doing multi-band compression that exists in the quantum stuff. So all of the tools are there. Now, when we're talking about money channels, when we're talking about like the lead vocal, I'm looking for something a little bit more. I want some odd harmonics on that. I want it to have a specifically tonality type of compressor on it. That's when I'm going over to the thing. You would laugh if you looked at some of my stuff. Everyone thinks that all I do is use plugins, but even when we're talking about 125 inputs or 130 inputs with Jay-Z, I think that there was only like 28 racks in that 130 inputs, It's not like I'm using all 64 and there's 9 plugins on each one.
And I bring that up because you guys are at the top level, and I know for a fact that there are people that are using 4 times as many, and it actually impacts the final result negatively. And so that's why I'm bringing this up.
Well, hear me, you do you, and if that works for you, then great. Right. The end result is what matters. So if I walk up to somebody and go, holy crap, they're using all this stuff, but the end result is good, then who am I to say, all right, cool.
Sure.
You do you. But but I find simpler better. Use the spices when you want to. And how about you, Chris?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question because there's so many different answers, and also because I think it's something people need to think about strategically when they're using what when. They also need to hear someone like Pooch, who is the face of and has been of waves for years, and it's so I'll say this for me, like you mentioned that I've got the console, I've got hardware, I've got UAD, I've got waves too. I've got everything under the sun. And so does Pooch. Or at times we both do.
It's a tool.
It's a tool. So this is what it comes down to for me. It comes down to a number. This is another thing that could be a very long conversation, but it comes down to a couple things. One, we're not at the point yet where, like, if it's an input and I do want to do some snazzy stuff on it, I want to use some extra stuff. There are certain consoles, SSL is good about this, where you can move the points around. You can move the insert point anywhere in the chain.
Yeah.
Digico is fixed. Different companies have different ways that you can do that. What we're not at the point of is where, with our fully in the box, and I mean in Pro Tools and a DAW counterparts, where you can take any plugin and put it anywhere at all.
Yeah.
So we're not there. So that being said, I can't now. Can you get complicated and make it where SoundGrid, for example, has your UA in it, and then you can move it around within there? Yes, you can. You can do that kind of stuff. You can do some of this, but for the most part, the way I typically do it is UA lives in UA world, Waves lives in Waves world, console lives in console world. So what I'm getting at is I will use the onboard. First of all, I will always use the onboard high pass filter. And Pooch and I have talked about this before, because when all the fancy shit takes to shit,
yes, high pass.
That high pass is on. It's also right there. I can grab it. I've double high passed. I've done that before, but the console high pass is always in use. A lot of times I'll use if I'm going to do extra stuff to an input with extra processing, I will use the console strip as the first bit of EQ inline, and it's mainly for subtractive cleanup kind of work.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
To clean up a bass, to clean up a vocal, to clean up anything that's getting whooped. That's the cleanup EQ before we maybe get into more of the colored fun stuff downstream. Also, if I know that I know it doesn't take long to go to your mouse and to get to your server or to reach over to your rack and do something. But I'm thinking of a vocalist here. If it's a vocalist and I know, like I've got a lot of vocalists I work for where I essentially play the EQ. Like I move it strategically, either chasing them or I just know on certain songs that they need to move to here. And I don't like automating EQ. I'd rather do it. What I'm getting at is if it's an input that I know there's the chance I need to grab quick, it might not be the most fun, colored, neat, artsy piece, but it might be the safest thing to do.
In a human interface thing as opposed to try to do it on the fly.
So I'm using the desk either because it doesn't need a lot of EQ, and I don't need the EQ to be anything other than kind of utilitarian. I'm doing it because I need to get to it quickly, or I'm doing it as the preliminary EQ stage as like a cleanup kind of thing. And so a lot of times I used to have a problem where I'd be like, I've got this plugin or I've got this piece of hardware on here. I shouldn't be using the desk also. And then I threw that rule book away a long time ago. You know?
Yeah.
One of the topics that you guys have spoken about before is the ability to, I think, Pooch, you've talked about these, not two different sources should share the same spectral content. And how do you carve space? So I'd like you to speak a little bit to how do you learn to EQ inputs in the context of the overall mix? Because sometimes, that might take a little bit of experience to carve or to shape a particular input in a way that by itself would sound very awkward, yet in the context of the mix, it's what it needs to be so that you have space for something else. So how have you developed that skill of EQing an input in the context of the mix?
Well, first off, it's been years of ear training. Like I would say to anyone that wants to take it to the advanced level and, be a world-class mixer, you should be spending a bunch of time doing blind EQ stuff and really learning where stuff is. It's taken me a long time, 30 years, to get to a point where, I hear a zing and I can tell you exactly what it is. You know what I mean? And so that is key in what you're talking about. But in regards to creating space, this is a really long conversation, but basically I think of it along the lines of like a painter, let's say. You can only have so much red in there before the painting gets all weird, So, sorry, my sink is now taking off.
No.
Oh my God. Anyway,
it's going with your frozen pipes.
It is. Apparently my hot water is now working. Great. What is happening here? Sorry, guys. So, like a painter, you say that's too much red, and so frequency-wise, I am conscious of what frequency space things are being allowed in my mix. So, in other words, I really think about, hey, the guitar shares that same frequency space that vocal does, for instance. And how am I going to make space? So what I do with it is by using panning to get that same frequency range away from that vocal.
Sure. So
that the same frequency space can be shared, but in a depth or in a width kind of a way.
Yeah.
There's
3 days of conversation there.
There really is.
To be aware of the fact that some master skill to develop is your ability to EQ instruments in the context of a mix as opposed to EQing an instrument in a vacuum. We go through this exercise during soundcheck where you solo something and you just listen to that and go, okay, you might have a great sounding snare, but that doesn't fit into the mix because it's not a snare show, or something.
Well, symphony for kick drum. Yes.
Exactly. Just so you know, I know we have a few people listening to us, and I think your clock is drifting like yesterday. So just so you know, that's why we're hearing a little bit of distortion every once in a while on on Pooch's vocal mic. It'll go away at some point in time, we hope. So
I need to go deal with my sink. I'll be right back.
Yeah, right.
All right.
You go.
There we go.
So we will continue talking about
this is what I've always wanted. He's gone. My scheme works.
This is a Grim and Stampy global control.
Between a snowstorm and clock issues, I finally get the floor.
I'm amazed. I'm amazed he's actually there. I was concerned. Yes, last night I'm going, dude, I just hope you have power tomorrow.
Right.
Which is so true. The topic of advanced busing. So when we talked about consoles earlier, one of the things I purposely skipped is the fact that the kind of consoles, platforms you're mixing on have significant busing capabilities, which is not common to a lot of consoles. Like my VI platform doesn't do bus to bus mixing. So number one, on the busing side of things, many engineers, will just take all the inputs, assign an input to a particular digital control group, VCA, whichever name we want to use today, and just send everything to left and right. Mm-hmm. Is that wrong? Can we just do that?
Mm-hmm.
Are you ever do that? Yeah, I'm asking you. Do we ever do that? Did you ever do that and go, but this is not working for me, I need to do something else?
Yeah, no. The notion that there is anything wrong at that is right up there to me with like who doesn't use a high pass. No, there's nothing wrong. Right. It all depends on what the goal of that input is. If it's of course there's nothing wrong with it. It just depends on what the end path of that thing needs to be per your decision making, you know. It doesn't have to be grouped. It doesn't have to go to 30 buses before it hits. It's really just whatever your prerogative is. And I mean, I do a ton of busing, but like I haven't always been able to do that. The consoles didn't used to. You couldn't do that. I mean, I didn't do any, but I had like a
few subgroups. If we had a gamble, you got 8 stereo subgroups, and that's it. Figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I used parallel compression in the analog days, and I might group something for some reason, but I didn't do nearly the grouping that I do now. It's kind of like that I said earlier when if I don't high pass something, it's not because I arbitrarily didn't think about it. The same thing holds true with busing. I bring these up before we start talking about parallel bus mixing and bus to bus mixing, because it's a complex process, and if you're going to enter into this process, just make sure that you know exactly what you're doing before you just go, well, I saw these on Pooch and Rabold's YouTube channel, I'm gonna go 4 levels deep on my drum busing just because they do it, I'm gonna do it. So make sure you understand why you're going into it and the consequences of it. That being said, also at the scale that the number of inputs that you're managing, there are other logistical reasons to group things. And I like, Pooch, I talked about this before, which is sometimes you're just grouping things because you have to give something to somebody else at some point in time. So I'd like you to speak to that.
For sure. I mean, a lot of the choices help my microphone, by the way.
It's back. It's okay. It's distorting again, but but it's okay.
Sometimes I speak louder. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a clock thing. It's okay.
Okay, neat. That's a new thing. Great.
Yeah. It must be the way the clock frozen.
What else can go wrong? What else do we have going on? No. So one of the reasons that I do a lot of bus-to-bus mixing is exactly what you just said, so that I'm setting myself up for success in any sort of situation where anybody can ask me for anything and I can give it to them. They want the drums by themselves, cool. They want drums without the parallel bus, fine. You want a stage left guitar player only without effects, great. And the only reason that I have all that to hand to someone is because before I even started listening to things, I've set up my structure so that all of that stuff is available to me to ship somewhere. So it's one of the reasons why I have a million buses when I build a 64 input thing on an SD7 console. I use up almost all the DSP because of the amount of buses that I'm building.
Same.
Right. And we'll talk in a minute here about both of your drum bus architecture, so they can get an understanding of how many levels deep we're going from bus to bus before we get to the master bus.
But it's one of the reasons that you set up yourself for that is so that you could hand that to anyone.
and heavily to create a particular sonic, signature sound that you're kind of going after to go, okay, I need all these inputs together, process or whatnot. I think I counted yesterday 620 videos on parallel bus compression. For those of you who are new to this, you can go Google parallel bus compression, but